There is a phone call that every single one of us will eventually receive. Maybe you've already gotten it. Maybe you're dreading it. It's the call that starts with someone's voice sounding just a little different than usual. And by the time they finish the sentence, your whole world has quietly rearranged itself. For Prophet Brian Carn, that call has come. His father, the man who raised him, who watched him grow from a 12-year-old boy preaching his first revival into a man who has stood in front of arenas full of people hungry for a word from God, has been given only days, maybe weeks, to live. And in the video we're breaking down today, Prophet Carn doesn't hide from that. He doesn't retreat behind the pulpit persona. He lets the cameras catch him in one of the rawest, most human moments a person can experience. Sitting at a hospital bedside, watching a parent's time run out, and trying to figure out how to hold on to faith while his heart is breaking in real time. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what he said in that hospital room, why he refused to panic when the news came, what he means when he warns about being sense-ruled, and how he closes the whole message with a teaching about the mind that could genuinely change how you handle the next crisis in your own life. So stay with me all the way to the end, because the last few minutes of this message are honestly the most important part. The video opens not with music, not with production, not with the usual trappings of a broadcast ministry. It opens with a hospital room. White walls. The low hum of machines. The particular kind of stillness that only exists in places where people go to either heal or say goodbye. Prophet Carn is there with his father, and for the first 2 minutes of this video, he is not performing. He is not delivering a sermon crafted for an audience. He is a son, sitting beside the man who gave him life, trying to say everything that needs to be said before it's too late to say it. He asks his father directly about his salvation. Think about how heavy a question that actually is. It's not small talk. It's not something you ask casually. When someone you love is facing the end of their life, the question of where they stand with God becomes the only question that actually matters. Everything else, the arguments you had, the disappointments, the things left unsaid for years, all of it shrinks in comparison to that one question. Are you at peace with eternity? This is a moment so many families have lived through and so few ever talk about publicly. There's a particular kind of courage it takes to ask your own father, out loud, whether he's ready to meet God. It requires setting aside every ounce of pride, every instinct to avoid discomfort, and choosing instead to have the conversation that actually matters before the window to have it closes forever. And in the middle of that hard question, there's also love. Prophet Carn takes this moment to express appreciation for his father, for the relationship they've shared, for the years behind them, for whatever it was that made this man not just a father, but someone worth honoring publicly, even in his most vulnerable moment. It's easy to forget when we see someone on a stage or a screen that behind every public figure is a childhood, a family, a set of relationships that shaped who they became. This video peels that layer back. Before he was prophet, he was a son. And in this hospital room, he's a son again, fully. If you've ever sat at a hospital bedside yourself, you know there's no manual for this. No amount of preparation makes it easier. You can know it's coming for weeks and still feel completely unready the moment you're actually sitting there, holding a hand that used to hold yours, watching someone who used to seem invincible become fragile in front of you. That universal, aching familiarity is exactly why this moment in the video resonates so deeply with people, regardless of their faith background or their opinion of Prophet Carn's ministry. Grief doesn't check your theology at the door. It meets everyone the same way. There's something else worth noticing here too, the way faith and grief coexist in this scene, rather than canceling each other out. A lot of people carry a quiet, unspoken assumption that having strong faith means you're not supposed to feel devastated when something like this happens. That somehow, if you really believed, you'd feel peaceful and untouched by the pain. This video pushes back against that idea, whether intentionally or not. Prophet Carn is clearly grieving. He's clearly emotional. And he's also, in the same breath, choosing to stand in faith. Those two things are not opposites. They were never meant to be opposites. From the bedside, the tone of the video shifts. Prophet Carn begins to walk the audience back through how everything unfolded, the events leading up to his father's hospitalization, how quickly things changed, how a normal day turned into an emergency. This is a pattern almost everyone recognizes from their own life. Crisis rarely announces itself in advance. It doesn't send a save the date. It shows up in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, in a phone call you weren't expecting, and a phrase from a doctor that rearranges every plan you had for the week, the month, the rest of your life. What Prophet Carn emphasizes here is the choice he made in that moment, and it really is worth sitting with the word choice, because that's often the part we forget when we're in the middle of a crisis ourselves. In the instant that devastating news lands, it feels less like a choice and more like an ambush. Fear doesn't ask permission. It floods in automatically, activating something ancient and physical in the body, a racing heart, a tightening chest, a mind that starts spinning through worst-case scenarios before you've even had time to process what you were just told. He describes choosing not to panic, choosing instead to stand on faith and on the Word of God. That's not a small thing to say, and it's an even harder thing to actually do. Anyone who tells you that faith makes panic disappear instantly and completely has probably never sat in a hospital corridor at 2 in the morning. What faith does, when it's real and when it's tested like this, is give you something to stand on while the panic tries to knock you over. It doesn't remove the wave. It gives you a rock to hold onto while the wave crashes. This is worth pausing on, because it's one of the more misunderstood aspects of what it means to walk by faith. Faith in moments like this isn't the absence of fear. It's a decision made in the presence of fear. A decision about which voice gets to be the loudest one in the room. The voice of the diagnosis, the odds, the worst-case scenario, or the voice of a hope that doesn't erase the diagnosis but refuses to let the diagnosis have the final word? There's also something quietly instructive about the fact that Prophet Carn chose to share this part of the story at all. He could have kept the details of his father's hospitalization private. Many people would. Instead, he's using his own crisis as a teaching tool, turning personal pain into something that might help someone else who's about to walk through their own version of it. That's a particular kind of generosity, whether or not you agree with every aspect of his ministry. Choosing to be vulnerable in public in the middle of one of the hardest weeks of your life is not the easy path. The easy path is silence. He chose the harder one. This is where the video shifts from personal story into teaching, and it's arguably the theological heart of the entire message. Prophet Carn introduces a concept that shows up throughout the New Testament in various forms, the tension between being carnally minded and being spiritually minded. It's language that echoes Paul's writing in Romans 8, where the contrast is drawn between a mind set on the flesh, which leads to death, and a mind set on the spirit, which leads to life and peace. Whether or not you're familiar with that passage, the concept translates easily into plain, everyday language. There's a difference between living your life governed entirely by what you can see, hear, and feel in the moment, versus living with an awareness that stretches beyond your immediate circumstances. He describes what it means to be sense-ruled. It's worth slowing down here, because this is a phrase that captures something a lot of people experience without ever having a name for it. Your senses are incredibly good at reporting what's directly in front of you. Your eyes can see a hospital bed. Your ears can hear a diagnosis delivered in careful, clinical language. Your body can feel exhausted, afraid, overwhelmed. What your senses cannot do, what they were never designed to do, is see beyond the immediate. They report on the visible and the present. They have no access to what's coming next, no access to outcomes still being written, no access to the parts of the story that haven't happened yet. When a person becomes entirely governed by their senses, especially during a crisis, the natural conclusion those senses draw is almost always the darkest available one. That's not a flaw in the person. It's simply what happens when you let a system built for reporting immediate physical reality make decisions about long-term hope. The senses will tell you the diagnosis is the whole story, because the diagnosis is the only part of the story currently visible to them. This is the danger Prophet Carn warns about, that relying purely on how a situation looks or feels can lead someone into what he describes as a kind of spiritual death. That phrase deserves unpacking, because it's not necessarily about physical death. It's about the slow erosion of hope, joy, and belief that things can still turn out okay. Discouragement rarely arrives as a single, dramatic collapse. It usually arrives the way water erodes stone, a little at a time, so gradually that a person doesn't notice how much ground they've lost until they look up one day and realize they've stopped expecting anything good to happen to them at all. What gives this section its weight isn't the theology alone. Theology like this has been taught for centuries. What gives it weight is the timing. This isn't a message delivered from a place of comfort, looking back at hard times safely behind him. This is a man teaching about resisting despair while his own father is actively dying down the hall. That's a very different kind of credibility. It's the difference between a swimming instructor describing technique from the pool deck and a swimming instructor demonstrating the stroke while the current is actively pulling at them. There's an important nuance here too, one that's easy to miss if you're only half listening. Overcoming a carnal, sense-ruled mindset doesn't mean denying reality. It doesn't mean pretending the diagnosis isn't real, or refusing to grieve, or performing positivity for an audience. What it means, in the framework Prophet Carn is teaching, is refusing to let the visible, immediate reality be the only voice allowed to speak into the situation. You can hold the hard medical truth in one hand and hold on to hope in the other. Those two things are not required to cancel each other out, even though our instinct often tells us they should. The video closes on what might be its most quietly powerful section, a teaching about the mind's default setting, and why managing that default is a daily discipline rather than a one-time decision. Prophet Carn describes something that will feel immediately familiar to almost anyone listening, whether or not they'd ever put words to it before. The human mind has grooves, worn paths, patterns of thought that it returns to automatically, especially under stress, simply because those paths are the most familiar ones available. For a lot of people, that default setting leans toward worry, toward self-doubt, toward assuming the worst outcome is the most likely one. Left unmanaged, the mind doesn't drift toward hope by accident. Hope, in this framework, is not the default. It has to be chosen, actively, over and over, especially in seasons of crisis when the mind's natural gravitational pull is toward fear. He teaches that believers have to actively govern their thoughts, a phrase that captures something important about how faith is meant to function, not as a passive feeling that either shows up or doesn't, but as an active discipline, closer to physical training than to emotional luck. Nobody wakes up one morning simply feeling permanently unshakable. That kind of steadiness is built, thought by thought, choice by choice, in the small, unglamorous moments long before the crisis ever arrives, and then it's tested, refined, and reinforced in the moments when the crisis actually hits. The instruction to prioritize spiritual identity over physical circumstance is where the personal story and the teaching finally converge into a single point. Nothing about the medical reality changes by the end of the video. His father's prognosis is still the same one it was when the video began. Days, maybe weeks. The circumstances haven't shifted at all. What has shifted, or at least what Prophet Carn is choosing to actively shift, is the lens through which he's interpreting those circumstances. Not denial. Not toxic positivity. A decision, renewed constantly, moment by moment, to not let the hospital room become the entire truth of his existence. This is, in many ways, the most transferable part of the whole message. You don't have to be a minister, and you don't have to be in a hospital room today to recognize the pull of a mind that defaults toward fear under pressure. Job loss. A hard diagnosis of your own. A relationship ending. A financial crisis that seems to have no way out. In every one of those situations, the mind wants to return to its familiar grooves. Worst-case thinking, catastrophizing, discouragement creeping in one small thought at a time. The teaching Prophet Carn offers here isn't really about his father, even though his father's illness is what prompted it. It's about what any of us do with the space between what's happening to us and how we choose to respond to it. It's worth stepping back for a moment and asking why a video like this resonates the way it does, beyond the specific details of Prophet Carn's ministry or theology. Grief is one of the few truly universal human experiences. Every culture, every faith tradition, every family eventually has to reckon with the reality that the people we love do not stay with us forever. And yet, despite how universal it is, most of us go into our first real experience of profound loss almost completely unprepared. Nobody teaches a class on how to sit at a hospital bedside. Nobody hands you a manual for the conversation where you ask someone you love whether they're ready to face eternity. What videos like this one offer? Whether or not the viewer shares Prophet Carn's specific theological framework is a kind of companionship in that unpreparedness. Watching someone else walk through it publicly and honestly gives language to feelings that often go unspoken. It normalizes the idea that faith and grief are not enemies. It gives permission to be both devastated and hopeful in the same breath, which is a permission a lot of people quietly need and rarely receive. There's also something to be said about vulnerability from public figures in general. So much of what we see from ministers, influencers, and public personalities is curated, the highlight reel, the victory testimony, the moment after the storm has already passed. A video like this one is different. It's not a testimony delivered from the other side of the crisis. It's a message delivered from inside it, in real time, with the outcome still unknown. That kind of honesty is rare, and it's part of why this particular message has resonated with so many people who are walking through their own version of a hospital room right now. A word for anyone watching this today if you're watching this and you recognize your own story somewhere inside it. If you've sat in a hospital room recently, or you're bracing for a phone call you know is coming, or you're simply exhausted from carrying a default setting of fear that you didn't choose and don't know how to change, this message was, in a real sense, for you too. The question Prophet Carn returns to again and again throughout this video isn't really about his father's specific prognosis. It's a question every person eventually has to answer for themselves. When the ground shakes, what are you going to stand on? Your senses will always report on what's immediately visible, and what's immediately visible is not always hopeful. But the invitation here is to let something other than the visible have the final word. That doesn't mean pretending the hard thing isn't hard. It doesn't mean skipping past grief in favor of forced positivity. It means what Prophet Carn modeled in that hospital room, holding both truths at once. The diagnosis is real, and so is the hope that doesn't depend on the diagnosis changing to still be real. By the time this video ends, nothing about the medical situation has resolved. There's no dramatic turnaround, no headline-worthy miracle delivered on camera. What there is, instead, is something quieter and, in its own way, more honest. A man choosing, in real time, how he's going to walk through the hardest days of his life. If this video reached you today, consider sharing it with someone who might be walking through their own version of this season. And if you'd like to be part of praying for Prophet Carn's father and family during this time, leave a comment below. Sometimes the most powerful thing any of us can offer another person is simply letting them know they are not carrying it alone.